The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the general store in Gila City, Arizona Territory, and Daniella Zimmerman stepped down into the dusty street wearing a dress that had more holes than fabric, her auburn hair escaping from a braid that had seen better days 3 states ago. She clutched a worn carpetbag that contained everything she owned in the world, which wasn't much, and looked around at the settlement that would become her new home if the man who had sent for her would still have her after seeing what a sorry sight she made. The journey from Missouri had been brutal. Bandits had stopped the first stagecoach 2 days out, taking anything of value from the passengers. They had stolen the decent dress she owned, the one she had been saving to wear when she met her intended husband, and left her with only the threadbare garment she had been using as a nightgown. The coach driver had taken pity on her and let her continue the journey, but each mile had added another layer of dust, another tear in the thin fabric, another knot of worry in her stomach. Now she stood in the afternoon sun of May 1878, 22 years old, and looking like something the desert had chewed up and spit out. The few people on the street stared at her, and she felt their judgment like pinpricks on her skin. A woman in a faded calico dress whispered to her companion, both of them looking at Daniella with a mixture of pity and disdain. "Are you Miss Zimmerman?" A voice spoke from behind her, deep and careful. Daniella turned and found herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the land itself. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun, wearing clean denim trousers, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up over tanned forearms, and a black hat that shadowed eyes the color of a summer sky. His face was all strong lines and careful control, a jaw covered with a few days of stubble, and a mouth that looked like it didn't smile often but might be something to see when it did. "Yes, sir. Are you Mr. Calloway?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended, rough from the dust of travel. "Thomas Calloway. Call me Thomas." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that needed a trim. His eyes traveled over her appearance, and she saw something flicker in them. Not disgust, as she had feared, but something that looked almost like anger, though she couldn't imagine what she had done to earn it. "You've had trouble on the road." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Bandits, sir, Thomas. They took my trunk and my good dress." "I know I'm not presentable, and I understand if you've changed your mind about the arrangement. I can work to earn passage back to Missouri, or perhaps find employment here in town." The words hurt to say, because going back meant returning to her sister's house, where her brother-in-law made clear every day that she was an unwanted burden, where there were already too many mouths to feed and not enough of anything to go around. Thomas put his hat back on and shook his head. "I haven't changed my mind. You came all this way and we had an agreement. But first things first. Have you eaten today?" The kindness in the question made her throat tight. "Not since yesterday morning." "Come on, then." He picked up her sad little carpetbag as if it weighed nothing and gestured toward the hotel across the street. "The restaurant serves a decent meal. We'll get some food in you and then we'll talk." Daniella followed him across the dusty street, acutely aware of how she must look next to his clean, pressed clothes. The restaurant was attached to the hotel, a simple establishment with wooden tables and checkered cloths. The few diners looked up when they entered, and she saw a woman actually turn away with a sniff of disapproval. Thomas either didn't notice or didn't care. He led her to a table by the window and held out a chair. No one had held out a chair for her in longer than she could remember. She sat and he settled across from her, his frame making the sturdy wooden chair look small. A woman with graying hair and a kind face came over, her expression curious. "Thomas Calloway, as I live and breathe. Haven't seen you in town in near about a month. Who's your friend, Miss Zimmerman?" My intended wife. She's had a rough journey and needs a good meal. Bring us 2 of whatever you've got hot and coffee and maybe some of that apple pie if there's any left." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as if he brought ragged women into the restaurant every day. The woman's eyebrows rose, but her expression softened as she looked at Daniella. "Coming right up. Welcome to Gila City, miss." When they were alone, Daniella forced herself to meet Thomas's eyes. "I should explain about the dress and why I look so awful." "You don't look awful." He said it with such certainty that she almost believed him. "You look like someone who's had a hard time and could use some help. Tell me what happened." So she did, starting with leaving Missouri and ending with the bandits who had left her with nothing but the clothes she barely wore. He listened without interrupting, his blue eyes steady on her face, his jaw getting tighter as she described how frightened she had been. "And they didn't hurt you, besides taking your things?" The question was quiet, but there was steel underneath it. "No. They were more interested in valuables than in bothering the passengers." She didn't mention how close it had been, how one of the men had looked at her in a way that made her skin crawl, how the leader had called him off with a sharp word. Thomas didn't need to know how scared she had been. The food arrived then. Thick slices of beef with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread with butter, and coffee so hot it steamed. Daniella tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but she was so hungry that good manners fled. Thomas ate his own meal without comment, occasionally refilling her coffee cup from the pot the proprietor had left on the table. When she had finished everything on her plate and half the slice of pie that followed, she finally felt human again. "Thank you. I can't remember when food tasted so good." "When did you eat last before yesterday morning?" Thomas asked. 2 days before that. I was trying to make my money last." She had started the journey with $10, money she had saved over 2 years of taking in mending and washing. By the time the bandits had stopped the coach, she had been down to $3 and some change, which they had taken along with everything else. The coach driver had let her ride on credit after that, saying he'd collect from Thomas when they arrived. Thomas's expression darkened. "You've been half-starved for days, wearing rags, and still you made the journey. That took courage." Daniella looked down at her hands, chapped and rough from work. "It took desperation more than courage. I had nowhere else to go. Look at me." It was a request, not an order, and she raised her eyes to his. "I don't know what your life was like before, but I can guess it wasn't easy. I'm not a fancy man, and ranch life is hard work, but you won't go hungry, you won't wear rags, and you won't be afraid. Those things I can promise you." Something in her chest loosened, a knot she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. "Why did you send for a mail-order bride? A man like you could surely find a wife here." "A man like me?" A hint of amusement touched his mouth. "You're not hard to look at, and you seem to have means." Heat rose in her cheeks at her own boldness. "The ranch takes all my time. I'm not much for socializing, and the women in town want a man who'll take them to dances and social gatherings. I want a partner, someone who understands that ranch life means early mornings and hard work, and sometimes being alone for long stretches. Your letters made it sound like that was what you wanted too." They had exchanged 6 letters over 3 months, facilitated by an advertisement he had placed in a Missouri newspaper. His letters had been straightforward, describing his ranch and his life without embellishment. Hers had been honest too, explaining that she was strong and not afraid of work, that she wanted a home of her own and a purpose. Neither had made grand promises or false declarations. It had seemed like a practical arrangement. Looking at him now, seeing the way the afternoon light caught in his dark hair and highlighted the strong bones of his face, Daniella felt something that wasn't practical at all. She pushed the feeling aside. Romance was for girls with dowries and pretty faces, not for women who arrived in rags with nothing to their names. I meant what I wrote in my letters. I'm a hard worker and I learn quickly. I can cook and clean and mend. I helped with the farm animals at my sister's place. I won't be a burden to you. She needed him to know this, needed him to understand that she would earn her keep. I don't want a servant. I want a wife. Thomas pulled out his pocket watch and checked the time. It's too late to head back to the ranch today. The ride takes 3 hours and we'd be traveling in the dark. I'll get you a room here at the hotel for the night. Tomorrow morning, we'll go to the general store and get you some proper clothes and supplies, and then I'll take you home. I don't have any money to pay for a room. The admission shamed her. I didn't ask if you had money. I said I'd get you a room. He stood and went to the hotel desk visible through the doorway, returning a few minutes later with a key. Room 5 upstairs. There's a bath down the hall. Take your time, rest, and I'll meet you for breakfast at 7. We'll get you sorted out tomorrow. Daniella took the key, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. His hands were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who worked his own land. Thomas, I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've seen the ranch and know what you're getting into. But his eyes were kind when he said it. Get some rest, Daniella. You look like you haven't slept properly in days. He wasn't wrong. She climbed the stairs to the small room, found it clean with a real bed and clean sheets, and nearly cried at the luxury of it. She used the bath down the hall, washing away days of dust and fear, then returned to the room and slept in the soft bed wearing her chemise. Her torn dress draped over the chair because it was the only thing she had to wear the next day. Morning came with sunlight through the window and the sound of the town waking up. Daniella put on the terrible dress again, braided her hair as neatly as she could, and went downstairs to find Thomas already waiting in the restaurant. He stood when he saw her, and his expression tightened at the sight of her in the ragged dress in the full light of morning. They ate breakfast quickly, eggs and bacon and fresh biscuits with jam, and then Thomas led her down the street to the general store. The proprietor, a round man with spectacles, greeted Thomas with obvious respect. "Morning, Thomas. What can I do for you?" "Miss Zimmerman needs to be outfitted completely. Dresses, undergarments, shoes, a coat, everything a woman needs, and don't skimp on quality. I want her to have the best you've got." Thomas's voice was firm, brooking no argument. The proprietor's eyes widened as he looked at Daniella's appearance, understanding dawning. "Of course, my wife can help with the fitting. Martha," he called toward the back of the store. A plump woman with a measuring tape around her neck emerged, took one look at Daniella, and her expression softened into pure sympathy. "Oh, you poor dear. Come with me. We'll get you fixed up properly." Martha led Daniella behind a curtain where ready-made dresses hung on hooks. "Let's see what we have in your size. You're a small thing, but we should be able to find something." She pulled down several dresses, holding them up for consideration. "This blue calico would look lovely with your coloring, and this green wool for cooler weather. You'll need at least 3 everyday dresses and something nicer for church or town visits." "I can't ask him to buy all that." Daniella's voice was almost a whisper. "Honey, that man out there wasn't asking what things cost. He wants you to have what you need. And between you and me, Thomas Calloway doesn't throw money around. If he's spending it on you, it means something." Martha pulled out undergarments, stockings, a proper corset. "Now, let's get you into something decent." An hour later, Daniella emerged from behind the curtain wearing the blue calico dress, new undergarments beneath it, and shoes that actually fit. The dress had a fitted bodice with buttons up the front, long sleeves, and a full skirt that swished when she walked. It was the nicest thing she had worn in years, practical but pretty, the kind of dress a respectable rancher's wife would wear. Thomas had been examining saddle equipment, but he turned when she approached, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. He looked at her like she was something precious, his blue eyes traveling from her neatly braided hair to the new shoes, and when his gaze returned to her face, there was warmth there that hadn't been before. "Beautiful," he said simply. "You're beautiful." The word hit her like a physical thing. No one had ever called her beautiful. Serviceable, perhaps, plain, sturdy, but never beautiful. Heat flooded her cheeks and she looked down at the dress, smoothing her hands over the fabric. "It's a lovely dress, thank you." "I'm not talking about the dress." His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. "Though it is nice, but I meant you." Martha bustled up with an armload of packages. "We've got 3 everyday dresses, 1 good dress for special occasions, 2 nightgowns, proper undergarments, 2 pairs of shoes, a winter coat, a shawl, a bonnet, and various sundries. Will you be wanting these delivered to the ranch?" "We'll take what she needs for today, and you can deliver the rest tomorrow." Thomas pulled out a leather wallet and counted out bills without flinching at the total. Daniella felt dizzy at the amount of money he was spending. The sum would have kept her fed for a year back in Missouri. "Thomas, it's too much. It's what you need. Don't argue." But he said it gently, without heat. They left the store with a smaller package containing a second dress and a few necessities. Thomas led her to where a wagon waited, hitched to 2 sturdy horses. He helped her up onto the bench seat, his hand strong on her waist, and climbed up beside her. "Ready to see your new home?" he asked. Yes. And she was, nerves and anticipation mixing in equal measure. The ride out of town took them through increasingly rugged country. The Arizona Territory stretched out in all directions, a landscape of hard-packed earth, scrub brush, and distant mountains. The sun beat down without mercy, but the air was dry, not humid like Missouri. Thomas drove with easy competence, the reins loose in his capable hands, occasionally pointing out landmarks. "That's the Gila River over past those cottonwoods. It's mostly dry this time of year, but when the snow melts up in the mountains, it runs full. The ranch is another hour north. We've got grazing land and a good well, some of the best water in the territory." He spoke with quiet pride. "How long have you had the ranch?" 7 years. "I came out here after the war, worked for other ranchers until I had enough to buy my own land. Built the house myself and the barn. It's not fancy, but it's solid." He glanced at her. "I should tell you it's just me out there most of the time. I've got 2 men who work for me, but they have their own places and families. During roundup or branding they come help, but day to day it's a solitary life. I don't mind solitary. At my sister's house there were 8 people in 4 rooms. Sometimes quiet sounds wonderful." She watched his profile as he drove, the strong nose and firm chin, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon. "Were you close to your sister?" "Once, before she married. After that, her husband made it clear I was charity, an extra mouth eating their food. I tried to contribute, took in mending and washing, but it was never enough in his eyes." The bitterness crept into her voice despite her best efforts. Then he was a fool who couldn't see value when it was right in front of him. Thomas said it with such conviction that some of the old hurt eased. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Daniella found herself relaxing into the seat, letting the rhythm of the wagon rock her. The landscape had a harsh beauty, so different from Missouri's green fields and forests. Here, everything was shades of brown and gold, with startling spots of color where wildflowers grew. A hawk circled overhead, riding the air currents. There. Thomas pointed ahead and she saw buildings in the distance. "That's the ranch, the Double C." As they drew closer, Daniella could make out details. The house was single-story, built of adobe with a covered porch running along the front. It looked sturdy and well-maintained, exactly as Thomas had described. Behind it stood a barn, a corral with several horses and various outbuildings. Everything was neat, organized, the property of a man who took pride in his work. Thomas pulled the wagon up in front of the house and set the brake before jumping down. He came around to Daniella's side and lifted her down, his hands spanning her waist easily. For a moment, they stood close, and she caught the scent of him, soap and leather and something uniquely male. "Welcome home," he said, and the word home made her chest tight. The inside of the house was cooler than outside, the thick adobe walls keeping out the heat. Thomas gave her a tour, his voice a little uncertain, as if worried about her judgment. The main room served as both kitchen and sitting area, with a wood stove, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, and a pair of comfortable-looking armchairs near a fireplace. Everything was clean but spare, the home of a man who lived alone and saw no point in fuss. A short hallway led to 2 bedrooms. Thomas showed her the larger one. "This is the main bedroom. I thought you could take it. I'll move my things to the smaller room." "No," the word came out firmly. "This is your house, your bedroom. I'm the newcomer. I'll take the smaller room, Daniella." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I brought you here to be my wife. Eventually, when you're ready, we'll share that room. Until then, you should have the better space." The directness of his words, the acknowledgement of the intimacy their marriage would eventually include, made her face heat. But she appreciated that he said, "When you're ready, not immediately, not tonight." "Eventually," she agreed quietly. "But for now, I'll take the smaller room, please." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. For now." The smaller bedroom was still larger than any space Daniella had called her own in years. It had a single bed with a thick quilt, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Thomas's things were in here, his spare shirts and trousers, his shaving equipment on the washstand. The room smelled like him. "I'll move these into the other room." He started gathering his belongings. "Not on my account, take your time." She set down the package from the general store and smoothed her hands over the new dress again, still not quite believing it was hers. They spent the afternoon in a strange domestic dance, Thomas showing her where things were kept, how he liked things organized, what chores needed doing daily. He treated her like a partner, asking her opinion, showing her respect that she had rarely received. When she started to prepare dinner, he worked alongside her, peeling potatoes while she seasoned a roast. "You don't have to help," she said. "I can manage the cooking." "I know you can. But I've been cooking for myself for 7 years. It's nice to have company." He dumped the peeled potatoes into the pot of water. "Tell me about Missouri. What was it like growing up there?" So she did, talking about the small farm her parents had owned. How her mother had died when Daniella was 12 and her father 3 years later, leaving her and her older sister to make their own ways. She talked about the good times before that, her mother's garden, her father's laugh, the creek where she used to catch frogs. Thomas listened, occasionally asking questions, his attention never wavering. When dinner was ready, they sat at the table together, and it felt almost natural, as if they had been doing this for longer than a single day. After dinner, Thomas went out to tend the horses while Daniella washed the dishes. Through the window, she watched him move with easy confidence, stroking the horses' necks, checking their hooves. He was gentle with the animals, patient, and she found herself wondering if he would be that gentle with a wife. The thought made her nervous and warm at the same time. She barely knew this man, yet in a few days or weeks they would marry, and she would share his bed. The prospect was daunting. Her sister had told her nothing about the marriage bed except that it was a wife's duty and she should endure it. But watching Thomas with the horses, seeing his careful strength, Daniella thought maybe it wouldn't be something to endure but something else entirely. Darkness fell quickly in the desert. Thomas returned to the house and lit the oil lamps, casting warm light through the rooms. They sat in the armchairs, Daniella with mending she had found that needed doing, Thomas cleaning his rifle with practiced movements. "We should talk about the wedding," he said without looking up from his work. "I thought we could go into town in a few days, once you're settled. The preacher can marry us at the church and we can file the papers with the territorial office. Unless you want something more elaborate, no, that sounds fine." She kept her eyes on the shirt she was mending. "Simple is good. Are you scared?" The question was gentle. "A little," she admitted. "I don't know you very well, and marriage is permanent." "It is." He set down the rifle and looked at her. "I can't promise I'll be easy to live with. I'm set in my ways and I'm not much for talking about feelings, but I'll provide for you, protect you, and treat you with respect. And I'll try to make you happy if you'll tell me how." The honesty in his words touched her. "I can promise the same. I'll work hard, keep your home, and be loyal, and I'll try to be a good wife if you'll be patient while I learn what that means to you. Then we have an understanding." He picked up the rifle again, but there was a small smile on his mouth. They sat in comfortable silence until Daniella's eyes grew heavy. Thomas noticed and stood. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow I'll show you around the property, introduce you to the cattle and the rest of the horses. It'll be a full day." She went to her small room and changed into one of the new nightgowns, soft cotton that felt like luxury against her skin. Through the wall, she could hear Thomas moving around in the main bedroom, the creak of the bed as he settled for the night. The house made small sounds as it cooled, wood contracting, the wind brushing against the walls. Daniella lay in the darkness, thinking about how much her life had changed in just 2 days. She had arrived in rags, desperate and half-starved, and now she wore a new dress, slept in a clean bed, and had a man who called her beautiful. It seemed almost too good to be true, and a small part of her waited for the other shoe to drop, for Thomas to reveal some hidden cruelty or demand some price she couldn't pay. But the larger part of her, the part that had seen how he looked at her, how he spoke to her with respect and kindness, thought maybe this was real. Maybe she had found something good. Sleep took her with that thought, and she didn't wake until sunlight streamed through the window and the smell of coffee filled the house. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Thomas kept his word and showed her every aspect of the ranch. They walked the property lines, him pointing out landmarks and explaining how he managed the herd. He introduced her to the cattle, a mix of Texas Longhorns and Herefords, tough animals suited to the harsh climate. She learned to gather eggs from the chickens he kept in a coop behind the house, to milk the cow, to pump water from the well. Thomas was a patient teacher, never making her feel foolish when she didn't know something, always willing to show her again if she needed it. And he was true to his word about not rushing her into marriage or into his bed. He treated her with careful courtesy, maintaining a respectful distance even as they worked side by side. But Daniella found herself noticing things about him. The way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he lifted heavy objects. The rare smile that transformed his serious face into something boyish and sweet. The gentleness of his hands when he helped her over rough ground, his fingers warm and strong around hers. On the 4th day after her arrival, 2 men rode up to the ranch house. Thomas went out to meet them, and Daniella watched from the porch as he spoke with them. One was older, gray-haired with a weathered face, the other younger, maybe 30, with a cocky grin. They both tipped their hats when they saw her watching, Thomas brought them over for introductions. "Daniella, this is Frank Martinez and his son, Carlos. They work for me during busy times and have the neighboring property to the east. Frank, Carlos, this is Miss Daniella Zimmerman, my intended wife. Pleased to meet you, miss," Frank said with a warm smile. "Thomas told us he was bringing a bride out from Missouri. Welcome to the territory." Carlos's grin widened. "You're a brave woman, agreeing to marry this old hermit. He spends more time talking to his horses than to people." "Watch it," Thomas said, but there was no heat in it. The easy banter between the three men spoke of long friendship. "We just came by to see if you needed help with anything before the wedding," Frank said, "and to bring you a gift from my wife." He pulled a cloth-wrapped package from his saddlebag and handed it to Daniella. She unwrapped it to find a beautiful crocheted shawl in shades of cream and gold. "Oh, it's lovely. Please thank her for me. She said she'd come by after the wedding to meet you proper. Wanted to give you time to settle in first." Frank turned to Thomas. "You setting a date yet? This Saturday. We're going into town in the morning to see the preacher." Thomas looked at Daniella. "If that's still agreeable to you." Saturday was 3 days away. 3 days until she became his wife in truth. Daniella felt a flutter of nerves but nodded. "That's agreeable." After Frank and Carlos left, Thomas seemed different, a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He was quiet through dinner, his responses brief, and when Daniella asked if something was wrong, he shook his head. "Just thinking," he said, "about Saturday. Having second thoughts." The question came out lighter than she felt. "No." He looked at her directly, his blue eyes intense. "Are you?" "No." And she realized it was true. Despite barely knowing him, despite the strangeness of the situation, she wanted to marry Thomas Calloway. She wanted to be his wife, to build a life with him in this harsh, beautiful place. Something in his expression eased. "Good. That's good." That night, lying in her small bed, Daniella thought about what it would mean to be married to Thomas. The practical aspects, certainly, sharing his name and his home. But also the intimate aspects, the parts her sister had been too embarrassed to explain properly. Daniella wasn't entirely ignorant. She had grown up on a farm, understood the mechanics of breeding. But with humans, she thought it must be different, more complicated. She wondered if Thomas would come to her bed on their wedding night or wait for some signal from her. She wondered if it would hurt as much as her sister had implied, or if Thomas's gentleness would extend to that part of marriage too. The thoughts kept her awake longer than usual, her body feeling warm and strange. Friday passed in a flurry of preparation. Thomas insisted on taking her back to town to the general store, where Martha helped her choose fabric for a wedding dress. Not white, which would be impractical, but a deep green that brought out the auburn in her hair, with lace at the collar and cuffs. "You'll be the prettiest bride Gila City has seen in an age," Martha said, pinning the fabric for alterations. "Can you have it ready by tomorrow morning?" Thomas asked. Martha laughed. "For anyone else, I'd say no. But for you, Thomas Calloway, and for this sweet girl, I'll work through the night if I have to. You come by at 8 tomorrow morning, and it'll be ready." They stopped by the preacher's house to confirm the ceremony time, then at the hotel to reserve a room for the wedding night. Daniella's cheeks burned at the knowing look the hotel proprietor gave them, but Thomas seemed unbothered, his manner calm and businesslike. On the way back to the ranch, Thomas was quiet again. Finally, as they neared the property, he pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her. "I need to say something before tomorrow." His voice was rough. "I know this isn't a conventional courtship. I know we barely know each other, but I want you to know that I'll do my best by you, as a husband, as a partner. And I hope that in time we can be more than just two people sharing a name and a house." "What do you want us to be?" She asked the question softly, her heart beating fast. Happy, together, maybe even in love if we're lucky. He reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. I'm not good with words, Daniella, but I can tell you that in these few days I've come to care about you, more than I expected, and I think if you'll give me the chance I could make you care about me too. I already do. The admission surprised her, but once spoken, she knew it was true. In less than a week, this quiet, strong man had worked his way into her heart. I care about you already. His eyes searched hers, and then he smiled, a real smile that lit up his whole face. Then we're starting with more than most marriages have. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so old-fashioned and sweet that Daniella felt tears prick her eyes. Then he released her hand, picked up the reins, and drove them the rest of the way home. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The desert cooled quickly once the sun dropped, and Thomas brought out a blanket to drape over Daniella's shoulders. He sat in the chair next to hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Are you scared about tomorrow?" he asked, a little, not about marrying you, but about everything that comes after. She pulled the blanket tighter. "I don't want to disappoint you. You won't." He said it with such certainty. "Daniella, I've lived alone for a long time. I've forgotten what it's like to have someone to come home to share meals with, to talk to at the end of the day. Just having you here has reminded me how lonely I was. You could never disappoint me." What about the other parts of marriage? The boldness of the question shocked her, but she needed to know. "My sister said very little except that it's a wife's duty, but the way she said it made it sound unpleasant." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "It shouldn't be unpleasant. It should be something shared, something both people enjoy. I won't lie to you, there might be some discomfort your first time, but I'll be as gentle as I can. And I won't rush you. We'll take things slow." The frankness of his words, the acknowledgement that it should be enjoyable, eased some of her anxiety. "Thank you for telling me that. We're going to be married, sharing a life. We should be able to talk about anything, even difficult things." He stood and held out his hand. "Come on. You should get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day." She let him pull her to her feet, and for a moment they stood close on the porch, the blanket still around her shoulders, his hand still holding hers. The air between them felt charged, full of possibility. Then Thomas stepped back, releasing her hand, and opened the door. "Good night, Daniella." "Good night, Thomas." She barely slept that night, too full of anticipation and nerves. When morning came, she dressed carefully in the blue calico dress, braided her hair, and joined Thomas for a quiet breakfast. He wore his best clothes, dark trousers and a white shirt with a black vest, and he had shaved, his jaw smooth and strong. They drove into town in the wagon, arriving at the general store just as Martha was opening. The wedding dress was ready, more beautiful than Daniella could have imagined. The deep green fabric fit perfectly, the lace delicate and feminine. Martha helped her dress, pinned her hair up, and stood back with satisfaction. "You're a vision. Thomas is going to forget how to speak when he sees you." Martha handed her a small bouquet of wildflowers tied with ribbon. "My gift to you. Now go get married." Thomas was waiting outside the store, and when Daniella emerged, his expression made Martha's prediction come true. He stared at her, his mouth slightly open, seemingly unable to form words. Then he recovered and held out his arm. "You're so beautiful," he said, his voice rough. "Most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The walk to the church felt like a dream. The preacher was waiting, along with Frank and his wife Maria, who had come to serve as witnesses. The ceremony was simple and short, the preacher's words blurring together until the moment when he asked Thomas if he took Daniella to be his wife. "I do." Thomas's voice was firm, his eyes on hers. "And do you, Daniella, take Thomas to be your husband?" "I do." The words felt like a promise, a commitment to this new life. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Thomas cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle, and kissed her. It was soft, careful, a first kiss between two people still learning each other. But there was warmth in it, promise, and when he pulled back, Daniella saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. They signed the marriage certificate, Frank and Maria adding their signatures as witnesses. Maria hugged Daniella warmly. "Welcome to the territory, Mrs. Calloway. You must come to dinner soon. I'll show you how to make tortillas." Mrs. Calloway. The name settled over Daniella like a warm blanket. She wasn't a burden anymore, not an unwanted mouth to feed. She was Thomas Calloway's wife, a rancher's wife, a woman with a home and a purpose. They had a simple meal at the hotel restaurant, Frank and Maria joining them, the conversation easy and warm. Then the older couple left, Maria giving Daniella another hug and whispering, "He's a good man. Be happy." Thomas and Daniella walked to the hotel, and suddenly the easy comfort of the morning disappeared, replaced by nervous awareness. Thomas unlocked the door to their room, a larger space than the one Daniella had stayed in her first night in town, with a big bed and a washstand and curtains on the windows. "I'm going to give you some time to yourself," Thomas said, setting down their small bag. "I'll go check on the horses, make sure they're settled. Take your time." He left, closing the door quietly behind him, and Daniella stood in the middle of the room feeling overwhelmed. This was her wedding night. In a few hours, she would no longer be an innocent girl. She would be a wife in every sense. She took off the green dress carefully, hanging it in the wardrobe, and put on the new nightgown Martha had helped her choose, white cotton with embroidery at the neckline. She took down her hair, brushed it out, and then wasn't sure what to do with herself. Sit on the bed, stand by the window, wait in the chair. A soft knock at the door made the decision for her. "Daniella, can I come in?" "Yes." Thomas entered, closing the door behind him. He had removed his vest and rolled up his shirt sleeves, and his eyes went straight to her. For a long moment, he just looked at her, standing there in her nightgown with her hair loose around her shoulders. "Lord, you're lovely," he said quietly. "I keep thinking I'll get used to how pretty you are, but I don't. I'm not pretty. I'm too thin, and my hands are rough, and I have freckles." The protest was automatic. "You're perfect." He crossed to her, stopping just close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him. "I know you're nervous. So am I, if I'm being honest." "You are." That surprised her. "It's been a long time for me. And I've never been with someone I cared about before." He reached up and touched her hair, letting the strands slide through his fingers. "I want this to be good for you. I want to make you happy." "I want to make you happy too." Her voice came out breathless. "I just don't know how." "Let me show you." He bent his head and kissed her, different from the careful kiss at the church. This was deeper, more intense, his hands coming up to cup her face as his mouth moved over hers. Daniella felt something awaken in her, a warmth that spread from where his lips touched hers throughout her whole body. She reached up and gripped his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him through the fabric of his shirt. He made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, one arm wrapping around her waist. When he lifted his head, they were both breathing hard. "Still scared?" he asked, a little, but also curious. She managed a small smile. "Curious is good." He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then the spot where her jaw met her neck, and each kiss sent little sparks through her. "We'll take this slow. If you want me to stop at any point, you just say so. Promise me you'll tell me." "I promise." What followed was a revelation. Thomas was patient and gentle, just as he had been in everything else. He took his time, showing her pleasure she hadn't known existed, making sure she was ready before taking what he needed. There was discomfort, as he had warned, but it faded into something else, something warm and connecting that left her clinging to him and breathing his name. Afterward, he held her close, her head on his chest, his hand stroking her hair. "Are you all right?" he asked. Yes. She was more than all right. She felt changed, claimed in the best possible way. "Is it always like that?" She felt him smile against her hair. "It gets better as you get more comfortable with it, with me." "I can't imagine better." She pressed a kiss to his chest, feeling brave in the darkness. His arms tightened around her. "Sleep now. We have a long day tomorrow getting back to the ranch." She drifted off in his arms, feeling safe and cherished, and when she woke in the night to find him kissing her shoulder, she turned to him willingly, eager to learn more about this new aspect of their marriage. The ride back to the ranch the next day felt different. Daniella sat close to Thomas on the wagon seat, his arm occasionally brushing hers, shared glances between them that spoke of new intimacy. When they arrived at the house, Thomas lifted her down from the wagon and then, instead of setting her on her feet, carried her to the door. "What are you doing?" she laughed, surprised. "Carrying my bride over the threshold, it's tradition." He shouldered the door open and carried her inside, finally setting her down in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Calloway." The name still gave her a thrill. "It's good to be home." They settled into married life with surprising ease. The days fell into a comfortable pattern of work and meals and quiet evenings together. Daniella learned the rhythms of the ranch, the endless cycle of chores that kept everything running. She discovered she had a talent for managing the chickens and the kitchen garden Thomas helped her plant. She learned to make bread that didn't turn out hard as rock, to roast meat until it was tender, to preserve vegetables for the winter months ahead. Thomas was an attentive husband, showing his care in practical ways. He built her a better chicken coop with nesting boxes at a comfortable height. He brought her wildflowers from the range. He always made sure she had what she needed before seeing to his own wants. And at night, in the big bedroom they now shared, he showed her other kinds of attention, teaching her about desire and pleasure, about the give and take between husband and wife. She grew comfortable with his body and her own, learning what he liked, discovering what made her gasp and arch into his touch. Summer deepened into August, the heat intense during the day but bearable in the shade of the porch. They had visitors occasionally, Frank and Maria stopping by, other ranchers and their families dropping in to meet the new Mrs. Calloway. Daniella slowly built friendships with the other women in the area, grateful for their advice about living in the territory and managing a ranch household. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Thomas took her hand. "Are you happy here?" "Very happy." She squeezed his fingers. "Are you happy with me?" "More than I thought possible." He lifted her hand to his lips. "I was existing before you came, now I'm living." The words settled into her heart, warm and precious. "I love you," she said, the first time either of them had spoken the words. "I think I started loving you when you called me beautiful while I was wearing that terrible dress, when you looked at me and saw something worth caring about." His eyes were bright in the fading light. "I love you too. I think I started loving you when you argued with me about which bedroom to take, when you showed me you had a spine and weren't going to just agree with everything I said. I fell in love with your strength." He kissed her then, sweet and slow, and when he led her to bed that night, their lovemaking had a new dimension, deeper and more meaningful now that they had spoken their feelings aloud. Autumn came, bringing cooler temperatures and the busy work of preparing for winter. Thomas and his hired men brought the cattle down from the high range, counted and sorted them, selected which ones would be sold and which kept for breeding. It was hard work from dawn until well past dark, and Daniella kept everyone fed with huge meals and gallons of coffee. On the last night of roundup, after Frank and Carlos had gone home, Thomas came into the house bone-weary and covered in dust. Daniella had hot water ready, and while he washed up, she heated dinner. They ate in comfortable silence, both too tired for much talk. In bed that night, Thomas pulled her close and said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For being here. For making this a home instead of just a place to sleep. For working so hard to keep everyone fed. For being my partner in all of this." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I don't say it enough, but I notice everything you do. I do it because I love you, because this is our life together." She nestled closer. "And because I'm happier than I've ever been." Winter arrived, bringing cold nights and occasional snow that turned the desert landscape into something magical. They spent more time indoors, and Daniella taught herself to make the things they needed: soap and candles and preserves. Thomas worked on mending equipment and planning for the spring. It was during this quiet time that Daniella realized her monthly courses were late. At first, she thought it was just the change in climate and lifestyle, but when another month passed with no sign of them, she began to suspect the truth. She was carrying Thomas's child. The realization filled her with a mixture of joy and fear. She wanted children, wanted to give Thomas sons and daughters to help with the ranch and carry on his legacy. But pregnancy and childbirth were dangerous, especially out here far from doctors and hospitals. Women died bringing children into the world, leaving behind grieving husbands and motherless babies. She didn't tell Thomas right away, wanting to be certain before raising his hopes. But he noticed anyway, the way he noticed everything about her. "You've been looking pale in the mornings," he said one day in late December. "And you didn't eat breakfast. Are you feeling poorly?" "Not poorly exactly." She met his eyes. "Thomas, I think I'm expecting a baby." The expression on his face cycled through surprise, joy, and then worry in rapid succession. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be. I've missed 2 courses and I've been sick in the mornings. Maria said those are the signs." He crossed to her and pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she were made of glass. "A baby. We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" She needed to hear him say it. "I'm terrified and thrilled in equal measure." He pulled back to look at her face. "I'm worried about you, about the risks. But yes, I'm happy. So happy." They stood together in the kitchen, holding each other, contemplating the miracle of the new life growing inside her. Thomas's hand settled on her still flat stomach, his touch gentle and wondering. The pregnancy progressed through the winter months. Maria, who had delivered several children herself, became Daniella's trusted advisor, teaching her what to expect and how to prepare. Thomas became even more protective, insisting she rest more, taking on chores she usually handled. "I'm pregnant, not broken," Daniella protested when he tried to stop her from gathering eggs. "I know, but humor me. I can't stand the thought of anything happening to you." The raw fear in his voice stopped her arguments. She understood his worry because she felt it too. But she also felt strong, capable, ready to bring this child into the world. Her body was made for this, had been preparing for this. She would trust in her own strength and in God's plan. Spring arrived with new life bursting forth everywhere. The desert bloomed with wildflowers, the cattle produced new calves, and Daniella's belly swelled with their child. Thomas talked to her stomach at night, telling the baby about the ranch and the horses and how loved they would be. His tenderness made her fall in love with him all over again. In late April, the pain started. Maria came to stay, along with Thomas's sister-in-law who lived 2 days' ride away and had experience with birthing. Thomas paced the porch, unable to be still, while inside Daniella labored through the longest day of her life. Maria was a calming presence, encouraging and practical. "You're doing wonderfully. The baby is coming just as it should. Just a little more and you'll meet your child." When the baby finally arrived with the sunset, a lusty cry filling the room, Daniella cried with relief and joy. Maria cleaned the infant and laid him on Daniella's chest, a perfect boy with dark hair and a red, angry face. "A son," Maria said with satisfaction. "A strong, healthy son." Thomas was allowed in then, and the expression on his face when he saw Daniella holding their baby was something she would treasure forever. Wonder and love and fierce protectiveness all mixed together. "Is he all right? Are you all right?" Thomas came to the bedside, his eyes moving between her and the baby. "We're both fine. Thomas, meet your son." She shifted the bundle so he could see the tiny face better. "He's perfect." Thomas's voice was choked with emotion. "You're perfect. Thank you for this gift." He kissed her gently, then touched the baby's cheek with one finger, marveling at the tiny features. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names, unable to agree on anything that felt right. But looking at her son now, Daniella knew. "Daniel, after my father. Daniel Thomas Calloway." "Daniel," Thomas tried out the name. "It's perfect. Hello, Daniel. Welcome to the world, son." The baby's arrival changed everything and nothing. The work of the ranch continued, but now there was a cradle in the main room, a tiny person to care for and protect. Daniel was an easy baby, nursing well and sleeping in manageable stretches. Daniella recovered quickly, her strength returning as the weeks passed. Thomas was a devoted father, holding Daniel whenever he could, talking to him constantly, showing him the horses and the cattle. "Never too early to start learning about ranching," he said when Daniella teased him about it. Summer passed in a blur of baby care and ranch work. Frank and Carlos were invaluable, taking on extra responsibilities so Thomas could spend more time with his family. Maria visited often, bringing gifts for the baby and advice for Daniella. One evening in August, almost exactly a year after she had told Thomas she loved him, they sat on the porch with Daniel asleep in his cradle between them. The sun was setting in spectacular fashion, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "You remember the first time you saw this view?" Thomas asked. "I do. I remember thinking how different it was from Missouri, how harsh and beautiful at the same time." She rocked the cradle gently. "I was so nervous that day, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake coming here. And now I can't imagine being anywhere else. This is home. You and Daniel are my family. This life is everything I never knew I wanted." She looked at him, this man who had called her beautiful when she wore rags, who had dressed her in silk and given her his name, his home, his heart. "I love you more than I can say. I love you too." He reached over and took her hand. "You know, when I sent for a mail-order bride, I thought I was just solving a practical problem. I needed a wife, you needed a home. I never expected to find this." "Find what?" "Everything. Love, happiness, a real partnership, a family." He squeezed her hand. "You were everything I needed, even though I didn't know enough to ask for it." They sat together as the stars came out, holding hands, watching their son sleep, contemplating the miracle of the life they had built together. Daniella thought about the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach just over a year ago, wearing rags and carrying nothing but hope. That woman seemed like a stranger now. She had been transformed, not by the silk dresses or the comfortable home, but by the love of a good man who saw her worth even when she was at her lowest. Thomas had given her more than material comfort. He had given her respect, partnership, passion, and purpose. He had given her a reason to believe in herself, and she had given him the same in return, breaking through his loneliness, filling his house with love and laughter, showing him that he deserved happiness. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone: a true home, a real family, a love that would last. Daniel stirred in his cradle, making the small sounds that meant he would wake soon for his evening feeding. Daniella lifted him, settling him at her breast, and Thomas moved his chair closer so he could put his arm around her shoulders. They sat like that, the three of them, a family united under the vast Arizona sky. The months turned into years, and their life together deepened and grew richer. Daniel thrived, growing into a sturdy toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair. He took his first steps on the porch, said his first word "horse" to Thomas's delight, and showed early signs of his father's quiet strength and his mother's determination. When Daniel was 2, Daniella found herself expecting again. This time there was less fear and more excitement. She knew what to expect, knew her own strength, knew that Thomas would support her through anything. Their daughter arrived in the spring of 1881, a tiny thing with dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. "She's going to keep us on our toes," Maria said with a laugh, handing over the squalling infant. They named her Sarah after Thomas's mother, and she was everything Daniel wasn't: loud, demanding, quick to anger and quick to laugh. But she was loved just as fiercely, another piece of their growing family. The ranch prospered. Thomas's careful management and hard work paid off, and they were able to hire more permanent help, building a bunkhouse for 2 cowboys who worked year-round. The herd grew, the house was expanded with 2 more bedrooms, and life settled into a comfortable rhythm of work and family. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Daniella by taking her into town for a night at the hotel, leaving the children with Maria. It was the first time they had been alone together since Sarah's birth, and it felt both strange and wonderful. Over dinner at the hotel restaurant, Thomas pulled a small box from his pocket. "I never gave you a proper wedding ring. We were in such a hurry, and money was tighter then, but I've been planning this for a while." Inside the box was a simple gold band set with a small diamond. Nothing ostentatious, but beautiful and meaningful. Thomas took her left hand and slid the ring onto her finger, next to the plain gold band she had worn since their wedding day. "5 years ago you stepped off a stagecoach wearing rags, and I thought I was the luckiest man alive that you had come all this way for me. Now, 5 years later, I know I was right. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Daniella Calloway. I love you more today than I did then, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Thomas, it's beautiful. You're beautiful. Our life is beautiful. Thank you for seeing something worth loving in that ragged girl. I saw you. That was enough." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her fingers just above the new ring. "You're my treasure, Daniella, my greatest blessing." That night, in the hotel room where they had spent their wedding night, they loved each other with the ease and passion of long intimacy, knowing each other's bodies as well as their own, finding pleasure in the familiar and comfort in the connection. The next morning, they collected their children from Maria's house. Daniel and Sarah ran to them with delighted shrieks, and Thomas scooped them both up, one in each arm, while they chattered about their adventures with Aunt Maria. Daniella watched her husband with their children, his face alight with love and laughter, and felt her heart might burst with happiness. The years continued to unfold, bringing both joys and challenges. There was the drought year when they had to sell part of the herd, the winter when Sarah got the croup, and they spent 3 terrifying nights not knowing if she would survive. The summer when bandits tried to rustle cattle and Thomas, and his men had to ride out armed to protect what was theirs. But through it all, Thomas and Daniella faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge overcome. They were partners in every sense, working side by side to build something lasting, raising their children with love and discipline, supporting each other through difficulties, and celebrating victories together. When Daniel was 8 and Sarah 6, another baby arrived, a surprise after Daniella had thought they were done. This one was another boy, and they named him Michael. He was a sweet-natured child, easy and affectionate, and his older siblings doted on him. The house rang with the sounds of children now, laughter and occasional arguments, running feet and slamming doors. It was chaotic and messy and perfect, everything Daniella had never known she wanted during those lonely years at her sister's house. On a summer evening when Michael was 3, the whole family sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset. Daniel and Sarah were arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. Michael was falling asleep in Daniella's lap, and Thomas had his arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever miss Missouri?" Thomas asked quietly. Daniella considered the question. "I miss my parents, wish they could have met you and the children, but miss Missouri itself. No, this is home. This has always been home from the moment I arrived." "Even when you were wearing rags and half-starved?" There was humor in his voice now. They could joke about it, that frightening time, because they had come so far from it, even then. "Because you looked at me with kindness instead of judgment. You saw me as a person worth caring about, not a burden or a charity case. You made me feel beautiful when I was at my worst." She shifted to look at him, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "You changed my life, Thomas Calloway. We changed each other's lives." He kissed her temple. "I was so lonely before you came. I didn't even realize how much until I had something to compare it to. You brought light into my darkness, Daniella. You brought life to this house. You brought love to my heart." Sarah looked over at her parents. "Are you two being mushy again?" "Yes," Thomas said without shame. "We're being mushy." "Problem, it's gross," Sarah declared, but she was grinning. At 11, she was starting to understand romance, even if she pretended to be disgusted by it. Daniel, now 13 and starting to show signs of the man he would become, was more thoughtful. "I think it's nice. You love each other. That's how it should be." "That's exactly how it should be," Daniella agreed. "Love is the foundation of everything good in life." As the children grew older, they became more involved in the ranch operations. Daniel showed a natural talent for managing cattle, often riding out with his father to check on the herd. Sarah, surprisingly, had a gift for training horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animal with patience and a soft voice. Michael, still young, showed promise in everything he tried, a bright child who soaked up knowledge like a sponge. Thomas and Daniella watched their children grow with pride and occasional melancholy for the swift passage of time. It seemed like just yesterday that Daniel had been a baby, and now he was nearly a man, tall and strong, starting to attract the attention of girls in town. Sarah was becoming a beauty, though she seemed more interested in horses than boys. Michael was losing his baby sweetness, turning into a lanky child with scraped knees and endless questions. "Where does the time go?" Daniella asked one night as she and Thomas lay in bed, the house quiet around them. "Too fast," Thomas agreed. "Feels like I blink and another year has passed. Do you ever regret it? Any of it?" She asked the question she had asked before, years ago, but needed to hear the answer again. "Not for a single moment." He pulled her closer. "Every year with you is a gift. Every day with our children is a blessing. If I could go back and live my life again, I wouldn't change a thing because it brought me here to you, to this." "I love you," she whispered. "After all these years, after 3 children and countless days of work and worry, I love you more than ever." "And I love you," Always have, always will. He kissed her, and even after so many years, the touch of his lips still made her heart race. The children grew and eventually began to leave. Daniel, at 20, married a rancher's daughter from the next county and started his own place with help from Thomas. Sarah, at 18, surprised everyone by marrying a horse trainer who passed through the territory, following him to California to start a breeding operation. Michael, the youngest, announced at 16 that he wanted to study veterinary medicine, and Thomas and Daniella sent him to school in Texas, proud and terrified in equal measure. The house felt empty with the children gone, too quiet after so many years of noise and activity. But Thomas and Daniella adjusted, finding peace in the solitude, rediscovering each other without the constant demands of parenting. They were no longer young. Thomas's dark hair had gone gray, his face lined by years in the sun and wind. Daniella's auburn hair had silver threads running through it, her hands more weathered from decades of work. But when they looked at each other, they saw past the aging bodies to the souls beneath, still young, still vital, still deeply in love. "We've built a good life," Thomas said one evening as they sat on the porch, the sunset painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and pink. "The best life," Daniella agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was a frightened girl on a stagecoach. Do you remember what I said to you that first day, when you came out of the general store wearing the blue dress?" Thomas took her hand, his thumb tracing the wedding rings she still wore. "You called me beautiful." She smiled at the memory. "I didn't believe you." "I meant it then and I mean it now. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever known, inside and out. You're beautiful when you're feeding chickens, when you're covered in flour from baking bread, when you're holding our grandchildren, when you're lying next to me in the dark. You're beautiful in every moment." Tears slid down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "How did I get so lucky? To find a man who loves me like you do. I'm the lucky one. You could have turned around and gone back to Missouri when you saw what a rough life you were getting into. But you stayed. You built this life with me. You gave me children and love and a reason to be grateful for every day." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it in the gesture he had made so many times over the years. "Thank you for saying yes to a rancher's proposal. Thank you for making the journey. Thank you for seeing something worth loving in a lonely man. Thank you for seeing something worth cherishing in a desperate woman wearing rags. Thank you for dressing me in silk and calling me beautiful. Thank you for giving me a home, a family, a purpose." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for loving me." They sat together as the stars came out, two people who had found each other across impossible odds, who had built something lasting from the shakiest of beginnings. The mail-order bride who had arrived in rags had become a rancher's wife, a mother, a grandmother, a woman of substance and worth. The lonely rancher had become a husband, a father, a man who knew the meaning of true happiness. The years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren, bringing changes to the territory as Arizona moved toward statehood, bringing the inevitable losses that came with aging. Friends died, their bodies giving out after lives of hard work. Thomas's health began to fail, decades of physical labor taking their toll. But through it all, Thomas and Daniella had each other. When Thomas could no longer ride out to check the cattle, Daniella sat with him on the porch, describing what she saw so he could picture it. When Daniella's hands became too arthritic to do fine work, Thomas sat with her and helped her hold her knitting needles so she could still make blankets for the grandchildren. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren in the house that had grown and changed over the decades, Thomas stood with difficulty and raised his glass. 40 years ago, I sent for a mail-order bride, hoping for a helpmate and companion. What I got was so much more. Daniella, you've been my partner, my love, my greatest blessing. You've given me a family, a home filled with joy, and 40 years of happiness I never thought I deserved. Here's to 40 more years. I don't know if we'll get 40 more, Daniella said with a smile, but however many years we have, I'll spend them loving you. The party continued around them, but Thomas pulled Daniella aside, into the room that had been his bedroom before it became theirs. I have something for you. He pulled out a box, larger than the one that had held her anniversary ring so many years ago. Inside was a silk shawl, pale blue embroidered with flowers, beautiful and delicate. Silk, Daniella breathed, touching the fabric with reverent fingers. Like you promised that first day. I dressed you in silk and called you beautiful, Thomas said, and I've meant it every day since. You're my treasure, Daniella, my greatest joy. She wrapped the shawl around her shoulders and went into his arms, careful of his frail body, holding the man who had given her everything. I love you, Thomas Calloway. I always will. And I love you, Daniella Calloway, until my last breath and beyond. They stood together in the room where they had shared 40 years of nights, 40 years of intimacy and comfort, 40 years of partnership. The sounds of their family celebrating drifted in from the other rooms, the legacy they had created together, proof that love could grow from the smallest of seeds into something magnificent. Thomas passed away 3 years later in his sleep, peacefully and without pain. Daniella woke to find him gone, his hand still holding hers, his face peaceful. She wept, but they were tears of gratitude as much as grief. They had been given more than most couples ever got, decades of love and happiness, a family that would continue their legacy, memories that would sustain her through the years she had left. She buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains and the grazing land he had loved. The whole territory came to the funeral, testament to the respect Thomas had earned over a lifetime of hard work and honest dealing. After the funeral, Daniella sat on the porch, wrapped in the blue silk shawl, and remembered. She remembered the frightened girl in rags, the kind man who had called her beautiful, the slow building of trust and affection into something deeper. She remembered 43 years of marriage, of laughter and tears, of hard work and small joys, of children and grandchildren, of growing old together. She lived for 5 more years, staying in the ranch house surrounded by family, watching another generation grow. Daniel managed the ranch now, carrying on his father's legacy. Sarah visited from California with her horse-breeding husband and their children. Michael, now a respected veterinarian, came home whenever he could. On a spring evening in 1923, Daniella sat on the porch wrapped in the blue silk shawl, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar colors. She was 87 years old, her body worn out but her mind still sharp. Her youngest great-grandchild was asleep in her lap, a beautiful baby girl with auburn hair. She thought about Thomas, about the life they had built together, about the love that had sustained her through every difficulty. She thought about that first day when he had looked at her with kindness instead of judgment, when he had given her hope for a better life. "Thank you," she whispered to the desert wind, to the spirit of the man she knew was waiting for her. "Thank you for everything." As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared, Daniella closed her eyes and let herself drift, the baby warm in her arms, her heart full of memories and gratitude. She had arrived in rags and been dressed in silk, had been called beautiful when she felt worthless, had been given love when she expected only duty. She had lived a good life, a full life, a life of love and purpose. And when she passed quietly in her sleep that night, still wrapped in the blue silk shawl, still holding her great-grandchild, She went with a smile on her face, ready to be reunited with the man who had seen her worth all those years ago. The mail-order bride who had arrived in Gila City, Arizona Territory, in May of 1878, wearing rags, had become a legend in her own right. A woman who had helped build a ranching empire, raised a family that spread across the West, and proved that love could grow in the harshest of soils. Her story was told and retold, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of seeing past the surface to the worth beneath. And every spring, when the desert bloomed with wildflowers and the sunset painted the sky gold and pink, the family gathered at the ranch to remember Thomas and Daniella Calloway, the rancher and his mail-order bride, who had built something beautiful from nothing, who had shown that love was the greatest gift anyone could give or receive. Their graves stood side by side on the hill, looking out over the land they had loved, and on each stone were simple words that said everything that mattered. Thomas Calloway, beloved husband, father, grandfather, he saw beauty in all things. Daniella Calloway, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She arrived in rags and left in silk, loved every moment in between. The ranch continued through the generations, each one adding to the legacy, but none forgetting the foundation on which it was built. The love between a lonely rancher and a desperate woman who had taken a chance on each other and created something that would last forever.